Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Dr. Reverend David Clark.
Mr. Speaker, she packed my bags last night, pre-flight, 0 hour, 9 a.m. And I'm going to be high as a kite by then. I miss the earth so much. I miss my wife. It's lonely out in space on such a timeless flight. And I think it's going to be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man. Rocket man burning out his fuse up here alone. Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kids. In fact, it's cold as hell. And there's no one there to raise them if you did. And all the science I don't understand. It's just my job, 5 days a week. A rocket man, a rocket man. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a modest poem penned recently by our very own parliamentarian and poet laureate Stephen Joyce during one of his many recent visits to the Rocket Lab Mahia launch site. It's often said these days in Mahia that, in fact, that Stephen Joyce is seen there more often than John Key is seen outside Richie McCaw's dressing room. That is how central it is to his program. And I take my hat off to him. It's well known, of course, that Minister Joyce is eloquent, capable and charming. Members of the House would affirm those things. But his extraordinary humility has held him back from sharing this poetry with the House until now. And it's the same humility, of course, that holds him back from saying just how pivotal he has been in Rocket Lab's success. But if you read media reports, it's all laid out there. Minister Joyce is absolutely critical to Rocket Lab's success. Don't die wondering. Go and read those media reports. And it's said, in fact, that if Stephen Joyce visited other provincial centres as often as he visited Mahia these days, Air New Zealand wouldn't just be increasing its fleet by the rate that they are, they'd be doubling their new fleet purchases. While I'm here, I'm going to just scotch a few other rumours before I move away from this levity about Stephen Joyce's appearances. Mr. Speaker, well, it is a bill about outer space, Mr. Speaker. I think it has to be noticed. I think that Mr. Joyce was not the man who did found it, and we have to go back to the beginning. We should actually look at the story. I commend Mr. Joyce, though, levity aside, for his efforts in making sure that we do have an appropriate space regulation program, and we will be supporting this bill. Mr. Speaker, it's a little over 9 years ago that the reports began about what was happening with Rocket Labs. The firm announced that it was going to launch 6 rockets into space, probably blasting off from the South Island, it was thought at that stage, and rising above the Earth 150 kilometres, delivering payloads of everything from ashes to scientific equipment, Mr. Speaker. And at that time, the ingenuity that went with that was celebrated. Economic Development Minister Trevor Mallard, who attended the launch of Rocket Labs, said Rocket Lab would enhance New Zealand's emerging reputation as a developer of first-rate technology and components. And I think that point was well made. It was made again by Mr. Joyce today. He has stressed the importance of this industry for innovation in New Zealand. We have, of course, many innovative companies across the spectrum, from rockets through to health products and beyond, in the agri sector and so on. But here we have something that truly captures the imagination. And I take my hat off to Peter Beck and his team. I have visited the site, and I know many members of this parliament have visited their factory where they are constructing these rockets, and it is truly awe-inspiring. These rockets promise the ecosystem for technologies not yet seen in New Zealand or the world. This industry has so much promise for New Zealand, and I think it is incumbent upon us as parliamentarians to look for ways to support the companies that will emerge in its shadow. So today I take off my hat. I acknowledge the pivotal role of the Foundation of Science, Research and Technology in the initial supporting of the Rocket Lab program back in 2007. The vision of those bureaucrats that took that decision is paying dividends today. The vision of the founders who had the drive to make this happen, to seek the funding, to seek the private sponsors, and to work with number 8 wire and on the smell of an oily rag to pull this project together. It has been through so many stages. I read a report written in 2009 by David Shearer, who was then the Labour innovation spokesperson, who was complimenting the project managers on their initial launch of the micro-sized rocket that took place, on Great Mercury Island, Mr. Speaker. There have been many parliamentarians keen to see this progress over many years. I, incidentally, was recently in Gisborne talking to the local Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive, Gavin Murphy, and he told me, Mr. Murphy told me that that he watched that same rocket release on the television, the Great Mercury Island scale rocket release, and a couple of days later phoned up Mr. Beck and said that there were opportunities on the East Coast. At that stage, the South Island, I think, was the most likely launch site, and Mr. Murphy, as Chamber Chief Executive, rang Mr. Beck and said, "Why don't you come on down? We'll host you. We'll show you around. And here's a Google map with some prospective launch sites on it." Local businesses saw the opportunity and they sought to attract Rocket Labs to the Mahia site. And of course, the rest is history. The team came down, had a look around the sites. There were further negotiations. It certainly wasn't a straightforward story, Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Murphy can claim his small contribution to that puzzle. And I think with this success, there will be many, many fathers claiming the success of this program. Mr. Joyce, not least amongst them. He is like a moth to the lights. He is like a man in front of those cameras who cannot be missed in the current publicity. But let's not forget there were so many people who have contributed to this program. We are keen on this side of the House to support this bill. We are keen to see a proper aerospace set of regulations in place to govern the use of our aerospace and to make sure that this technology is appropriately employed and that any other subsequent companies that wish to work in this space are also held to the highest standards. Our international reputation depends on it. We have been working closely with as I understand, the government's been working closely with the United States authorities to make sure that appropriate measures are in place for the space program, and that spirit of cooperation will continue. The legislation drafted well by officials will continue through this House, and we will support it, assuming it looks like it is now, and the submissions through to Select Committee are suitably supportive as well, and I cannot imagine at this stage that they would not be. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to support this. I note the history of support through private enterprise, through government, and through the spirit of the East Coast wanting to get it there. I've noticed plenty of reports with Stuart Nash in them down there supporting on the site as well. Many parliamentarians will be there cheering this rocket launch on when it happens and wanting to support the industry, see a diversification of our exports and see this as something that runs that flag up the pole that we are keen to see continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.